Well, welcome back to FinWeek Money Matters. It's said that there is currently a global war for talent. The scary aspect is that many businesses don't know who their talented staff members are, how to spot them and how to nurture them. Dr. Gavin Symanowitz, Managing Director of feedbackrocket.com, joining us now at the desk to discuss how to spot talent within an organization. Talk to us, Gavin, about the issues with regards to trying to actually find these talented members within an organization. Why is it so hard?
It's hard for two reasons. Firstly, because the definition of talent isn't actually clear. A lot of companies don't know what talent actually means. And on top of that, they leave it to the managers usually. They say who's performing in your team, who needs to be rewarded, who needs to get the high bonus this year. And they leave it to the judgment, which is usually quite subjective and subject to bias, of the individual line managers.
Okay, so you're leaving it up to the boss, who's not necessarily the right person to be picking talented staff members for promotions. Is that what you're saying?
I think maybe that's a bit of a simplistic view, but I think that is the challenge. Is that one of the things I find very interesting is how teams get made up, and typically teams. Often you'll see a team will come in and they will take over a project or they'll take over a business unit, and very often you'll find that it's a cull of the old staff and new staff come in, and I think what's interesting is the dynamics of the way people, they may work well with a certain group of people, and then when a new bunch come in, there's immediately friction. There's not necessarily complementary skills through it. So, one of the things I find very interesting about this article was the way that, the reference that you don't always see who the talented people are on your staff. There are people within your organization who are very much the glue that actually make things work. And you might find that you don't actually recognize the role that they play in the organization until you've gotten rid of them, and then suddenly you say, but why didn't this project?
Or they go and leave for a few days or something like that.
100%.
So talk to us about how to actually then spot the talent. If you could run through the list of, you're a manager and you're wanting to nurture the right people for the organization, how do we go about that process?
Well, we looked at it from a very different view, and I think the best way to explain it would be an analogy. So imagine that you're a little league soccer coach and you have to pick the best team from the young faces that are standing in front of you. So the one way would be to make them play, to actually watch them with their skills on the field. The other way would be to say, let's pick two captains, put them next to each other, and let them pick the team. So he'll say, I want you, I want you, I want you. And what happens there is the kids know who the best players are. They've played with them every single day of their lives. They know who scores the goals. They know who lets the goals through. And every single time you do this, they're going to pick the best players on the team. And we thought maybe we could apply that same analogy within the work environment, because if you think about it, you know who the people that you work with on a daily basis that add the most value to the organization. The managers don't always know that, but you do. So if we had to ask you, who do you work with on a daily basis that adds the most value in terms of the knowledge, skills, experience that they offer, we can get a very different view of who the talent is within the organization rather than the traditional view, which is relying on the manager himself.
But what about people then, choosing friends also? How do you make sure that they're actually not, choosing the best friend as opposed to choosing the right player for the right job?
And we were worried about that. So what we said is, if you choose each other, then that doesn't count as much as someone who nominates someone else where it isn't reciprocal. We also looked at things like that all nominations aren't counted equally. So if I'm nominated by someone else who's very highly nominated, then that counts more, because talented people tend to identify other talented people more accurately. We also looked at things like the number of nominations that people made. So if you nominated a whole bunch of other people that you think add value, that doesn't count as much as if you just did one or two, because then you probably thought through the decision a bit more carefully.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe just jump in there though. I understand why you don't want to pick your friends for it, but often you find that good combinations tend to work longer, harder, and more productively. So I think you've got to look at it from that aspect. There might be three people that work a hell of a lot harder and a lot quicker, and probably will work longer hours for the same amount of reward as five people who are trying to, who are all trying to own their little slice of the pie. So I think you do want to try and find the components and the groups of people that push together.
Just to pick up on Gavin's point that talent recognizes talent, an interesting example of that is I was at a media roundtable with the new Vodacom CEO, Shamil Jusuf, this morning, and he worked with Alan Craig Sr. in Vodacom many years ago. And as a director and CEO of the company, Alan recognized Shamil's talent, and as a 23-year-old, Shamil was appointed as managing director, which is an incredible achievement. But the point is that Alan looked beyond his age, his experience, and recognized the talent, perhaps because of his own talents, and pushed that talent forward. And now we see Shamil's the CEO of Vodacom, so it was really a good decision.
And of course that age factor is always that big thing, that managers say, well, you must wait till a certain period of time before you get the type of promotion.
Yeah, I mean, age and tenure at the company are often variables that people take into account, but not always are that relevant. So what we found in the research, quite interestingly, is there were a lot of people who were identified as being particularly talented who either hadn't been at the company for very long or who were very young. And that was surprising. And that almost enabled the managers to identify certain people that they would almost fast track or put on management development programs, because other employees had spotted some kind of potential in this person, even if the managers themselves had written them off because of those subjective biases that we spoke about.
The big issue, though, is keeping the talent. Because now you've identified the talent, you're trying to nurture them, and then perhaps they're starting to look beyond the company for their growth, new growth. And that's a big issue always.
It always is, and it often comes down to the manager himself. And that was one of the most interesting findings of the research, is we looked at managers' nominations and saw how they compared to the nominations of the employees themselves. And hopefully you're going to have close correspondence between them. And we found that the better managers tended to measure it accurately. So they selected the same people that everyone else did. The problem is when you had poor managers, they tended to select certain people that no one else did, or they missed people that other people thought were particularly talented. And I think that gives a good clue on how to retain talent. Because talented people want to work for good bosses, and that keeps them within the organization. As soon as the boss doesn't recognize the talent that the people actually offer, even if their colleagues do, then they move on.
Certainly a very good point there.
And I think it needs to be emphasized. People want to work for good bosses. I think, we've chatted a couple of times on the show about how you don't want to go to work where it's work. I mean, you
want to be inspired. You want to be working
feel like I'm building
something.
And I think that's a role of management that doesn't always get, you get managed by spreadsheet rather than being managed to try and develop a good team. And I think a good team pulling in the same direction, incredibly powerful.
Very time intensive though, also for managers.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that when you do get it right, the output is immediate. You can start seeing that your staff work longer, they work, but they're enjoying what they're doing. The ideas start to come through, and big ideas turn into big revenue.
I would say a key point in both spotting and keeping the right talent is having an open mind, and then also being flexible. So allowing people to, for example, work remotely, or cross channels or cross positions, and be able to try out different things. And that keeps talent inspired and motivated to keep pushing themselves and learning. So don't just pigeonhole them into one role, let them try new things. And that will inspire them and motivate them to
feel that they aren't
constrained,
constrained, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I suppose that's really a symptom of the world we live in today, where you've got flexi working hours, you've got to move towards that. People want to be able to have, live the lifestyle that they think is appropriate right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about empowering people to be able to do the jobs that they have been hired to do without micromanaging them, and giving them the freedom to express themselves. And very often managers don't do that, and talented people feel constrained, and that's when they vote with their feet.
So basically, the most important thing is this study where you were able to give specific people an opportunity to nominate. So you think that's a starting point for an organization? How practical is that for larger organizations?
I think it's a different view of the mountain. So instead of saying, well, we're going to rely on one flawed view, which is just the manager alone, let's improve the picture by looking at what employees themselves say. And very often that's a much more accurate picture of who is adding value in the organization. If you had to scale that up to a large organization, I think it would work equally well, provided that you had two groups within that. So the one would be the immediate divisional department of that particular employee. And then I think it would be actually quite insightful to say, well, who beyond your immediate group actually is adding value in the organization? Because those are the people that are almost bringing cross-functional teams together in ways that maybe upper management don't recognize.
How often do you think this should get done, though, Gavin? I mean, if often we have these quarterly reviews or your annual reviews, and they're painful. The guys are simply looking to do it as a tick box exercise. How often does it get done? That gets you make some value.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. It's the first time we've run the research exercise. It was more answering, unanswered questions for us to see, is this an interesting exercise? Does it answer questions that we haven't answered before? And I think it did. Would the picture change dramatically in a year's time? Would the talented people automatically be or suddenly become untalented, or vice versa? Probably not. But I think what it would do is enable you to identify those people who perhaps are coming onto the radar screen, that are starting to add value, that have now been here an extra year and have developed those relationships with other people. Other people are starting to see their potential. So I would say probably value within every year, although again it's a brand new type of research that hasn't been done before, so it's a little bit up in the air.